and welcome to another fabulous episode of that 401k podcast. Ari Rosenbaum here. Topic for this week. This is the one about 401k plan sponsors and how they can't afford to be cheap. But of course, first things come first, and that's, of course, the time in the episode where I have to shill for my events. Go to that 401ksite.com for further information about that 401k National Conference and that 401k Conference. That 401k National Conference, just a couple weeks away. I'm all stressed out about it. Got to order the lanyards, trying to order a banner for the background and all that stuff, trying to get people involved and attend. Great fun at Walt Disney World Swan. Um, discount hotel rates, discount Disney passes. Ron Duguay is going to be there. Goose Gossage, March 10th to 11th, Walt Disney World Swan for the first and only national conference. That's a joke, or is it? We'll see. We'll see March 10th to 11th. Go to that 401ksite.com for further information. Unlike the regional events, this is open to third-party administration firms as well to attend. Quite a few great agenda items dealing with the Secure Act, marketing, the election, all that kind of good stuff. Retireaholics will be there to film an episode, or is it record? I guess because there's no more film. But anyway, we hope that you can join us. And of course, after Disney World, we got our local events: Houston, Texas, April 17th, May the 8th in St. Louis, June the 5th in Minneapolis. Going to have game tickets. I just bought the tickets for Houston, which is going to be a lot of fun. And of course, with Houston, I will not be banging any garbage cans. I will not be, stealing any signs. But it will be a great event in Houston, St. Louis, Minneapolis. Going to start booking the fall events. Looking at some really great locations, and of course, $100 gives you lunch, stadium tour, meet and greet with a former great. Working on the guests for the spring events. And then pretty soon, in a few months, or not even a few months, a few weeks, we'll talk about a networking event that I'll be doing at Citi Field in July, which should be a lot of fun, something different, and something open not just the retirement plan business, but other companies as well. So please go to that 401ksite.com for further information. This week's podcast, one of my favorite topics: plan sponsors and why they can't afford to be cheap. One of the things I really dislike about people are people that are cheap. And I'm not talking about people that don't have the financial resources to fund things. Listen, I'm a first generation American. My parents didn't come from, they weren't born here. My grandparents weren't born here. My grandparents came to the country in 1964, at least my mother's side and my father's side. They came out in 60. I think they also came out in 64. Actually, no, probably 62. I know my father came to the country in 65. But anyway, these were not wealthy people. These were hard workers. My grandfather, my maternal grandfather was a cobbler. My maternal grandmother was a seamstress. My paternal grandfather was in the antique restoration business. These were hard-working people. They didn't have the financial resources. I'm talking about people that are cheap. I'm talking about, the people down the block who, one of them is a school teacher, and they seem to be doing okay, but they only did new siding on half the house. So they have the oddest looking house because they have two different forms of siding. They put new siding up about 8 years ago, and they haven't replaced the other side since, so the house looks odd, but yet they have money for other things. So that's always one of the things I really don't like. People that are just cheap. People that that have the resources and are just cheap. They don't want to pay. Perfect example, I'll bring this up, but, don't think less of me, but, for these 401k conferences, I get sponsors. And, to be honest, for these local events, a speaking gig is $1,500, and then I have a lower sponsorship of $500 for plan providers who, give 2, 3 minutes and they want to speak. And sometimes when it comes to speaking sponsorships, I make deals. If people book multiple speaking slots and they ask for it, I'll give a discount. Or if I really need to sell a spot because it's getting close to the event and I'd rather have a spot filled for whatever, I'll make a discount. So what happened was I had an event somewhere. I don't want to say where, but anyway, I had a provider who was interested, and he wants me to help him market his service. I don't even want to say what the service is, but it was a service. He was a plan provider, and the service didn't really overwhelm me because everybody else quite a few different companies offer the same service. But I'm always interested in talking to people, networking, seeing where things fit. So this plan provider invites me to meet him at his private club that he's a member of, that he has to pay dues for, and invites me for lunch. I wouldn't say it's a fancy lunch like a dinner at Morton's or Peter Luger, but it was a nice lunch. And he says, "Oh, I'm interested in that $500 sponsorship, but I only have $250 for it." And I said, I give breaks on the speaking slots because I do, but I don't on the $500 ones because to me, it's really inexpensive. The $500 includes admission to the events. If a plan provider wants to bring one other person for the company, I don't say no because it's not just about the money. It's about the networking opportunities and getting the room filled and all that. So it's like I'm not making that much money on these $500 sponsorships. I'm doing it to subsidize the event, and I'm like no. And so that was that. And then the guy calls me up again in a couple weeks and he says, "Oh, well, again, I still only have $250 for the event." And I'm like, "Well, the price is $500." And that was the last phone call I had with him. And, I understand when people, can't afford things and they try to make deals. But, the guy invited me to his private club, treated me to lunch, and all of a sudden doesn't have $250. And that's kind of, like I said, nitpicking, or in Yiddish we call it a schnorrer, which is a schnorrer is not really a cheapskate, but a schnorrer is somebody who is a chiseler. It's one of my favorite Yiddish terms, somebody who's going to chisel you. And I hate chiselers. I hate, people who, when they have the money, perfect example of that is my wife will sell these used things on, Facebook or whatever. It's always a bad idea. She sells like used kids furniture or whatever it is, and she'll say these bin table thing is like $25, and then people are gonna chisel her for $20 or $15, and it's just, this is my price, this is my firm offer. Don't try to chisel me. And I think that is something that plan sponsors do. Not all, but quite a few. And they really shouldn't be that way. The reason why they shouldn't be that way is the idea that somehow, cheaper is better. And I think when it comes to, especially with TPA services, one of the biggest problems in the industry, I find, is that third-party administrators don't really do a great job, and I'm talking as a whole, don't do a great job in expressing what they do for their clients, and that there is a difference in price. Many years ago, I started a law practice on the side when I was working as a TPA attorney. And I was going to do wills for like $100 and this, and that, and I was going to be this low-cost provider, and it failed miserably because, in all honesty, I never got the volume. And legal services isn't something that people are gonna, bargain on price. You can't sell legal services like you can sell a blouse at Walmart. Discounting doesn't work. But the problem in the 401k world is plan sponsors, I still believe, don't understand what a good TPA does. It's something that I've always expressed in the 10 years now that I've been in my own practice. TPAs really need to say, you know what, this is the difference between us and somebody who's, cut rate and not offering a good service. We're a good TPA. We keep you out of trouble. We file the 45500 timely. We do the discrimination testing correctly. We do the reconciliation, the allocations, this and that. And, you know, plan sponsors don't understand that. They just see pricing. And, the number one thing that they don't understand is fee disclosure was a great thing for this industry. And the reason why it was a great thing for this industry was because it gave us fee transparency. There was nothing worse for a plan sponsor to have fiduciary liability for costs and not understanding how much they're being charged directly and indirectly by plan providers. So it was a great thing. And of course, the problem is that there were plan sponsors out there who thought that fee disclosure regulations meant that they had to get the lowest cost provider. Now, a lot of the Chicken Littles in this retirement plan industry who insisted that there was going to be a race to the bottom after 2012, well, that really didn't happen. Fees have gone down, and I think that's because of competition, transparency, and breakthroughs in technology, maybe consolidation in the business or whatnot. There really hasn't been a race to zero. But there are some plan sponsors who just, they will go to save a couple bucks. They will go across the street to save, $100 or a couple $100. And, hiring a plan provider just because they're the cheapest is one of the, stupidest things you can do. I've discovered the hard way sometimes when I go many years ago with my wife. We would shop at Walmart and we'd buy kitchen appliances or kitchen gadgets and doodads and all that kind of stuff. And clearly, we found out that we're low quality than what Target had or Home Goods or whatever it is. And we learned that to pay a couple more bucks extra, you get a better quality. And I think the plan sponsors really need to understand that. Because some of the low cost providers do a good job of creating headaches for plan sponsors because they're not doing a good job a good job in shielding the plan sponsors from any liability. Perfect example. I think I probably mentioned on the podcast here and there. There was a TPA. He created a lot of grief and litigation for his plan sponsor's clients. For this one plan sponsor client that I represented at one time because he never provided 25 years of valuations and gave such bad advice dealing with distributions and eligibility and all that the Department of Labor had this misconception that this woman was embezzling money from her own defined benefit plan. And there's nothing wrong with hiring a plan provider because they are low cost. But that shouldn't be the only reason. And I think that too many plan sponsors, dealing with the payroll provider, TPAs, or, some really cut rate financial advisor, just picking them on a price is just an absolute disaster. There needs to be more than, there has to be several legitimate reasons as why you need to hire a plan provider. And just making sure it's cost based is just, a bad idea. Next is, going it alone without a financial advisor. One of the beauties of Home Depot, I find, despite the fact that they put every other chain of hardware stores out of business except for Lowe's. Rickles in New York. I don't think you had Pergament and Channel and True Value is kind of still around, and so's Ace, but they really did a number on that local hardware store. And one of the things they were very good at is the idea that people can do things themselves. I can't because I got two left hands and I'm right-handed. When it comes to that kind of stuff, I just never been handy. Probably because my father was an electrician and he did all that stuff and I didn't. But Home Depot was very good, and Lowe's as well, in getting people to do their own things. And, financial advice is not something that a plan sponsor could do it themselves. Sure, if they have a solo 401k and, any other type of plan that's not covered under ERISA, they can handle it on their own. But once they have employees, they need to hire an advisor. And maybe I could, even without even without any accreditation in their time in the financial advice world, I think I could develop a good fund lineup. I don't think it takes brain surgery uh, to pick a fund lineup. There are thousands and thousands of mutual funds. I think that, looking at, profiles, I could determine what are good mutual funds. But, you know, I wouldn't be a financial advisor on a plan because picking funds, I think, in my opinion, is the least of what a financial advisor really does. A financial advisor doesn't just pick funds. They develop a process in place for investment policy statement. They do reviews over investments, and they help uh, plan participants through investment education, the enrollment process, and they also serve as an ombudsman. So, when something goes wrong with a TPA or an arrest attorney or another plan fiduciary, it's always the financial advisor that's going to get the call and the complaints. Um, you know, and years ago, again, I always talk about it. And when I was at that law firm, and Pat was the HR director, she asked me to look over the plan, and I looked over the plan, and I looked over the fund lineup, and it looked like something like really, really old. I'm like, who picked these funds? Oh, the arrest attorney, the partner who left the firm, he picked this out 10 years ago. So I'm like, you don't have a financial advisor on this plan? And she was like, and she was surprised when I said, you're opening yourself to a lot of liability for nothing by not having a financial advisor. The reason I bring up the story too is I still to this day, in all my years as an arrest attorney, I don't think that I was as insulted as when I gave her a list of financial advisors, um, and she didn't pick one of the ones that I had recommended. There were like 3 or 4 people. And when it came time to changing the TPA, I wasn't consulted. And, I got insulted by that because, she was mismanaging the plan for years as the plan trustee. And she wouldn't let me have a say in how things should be run. And I was kind of the ERISA expert uh, for that company. So um, that's a big deal for me, and that's why I keep on bringing it up. Because, like I said, in the 22 years that I've been an ERISA attorney, I've never been insulted more in my life because, again, I was the expert. And, I think when you ask people for advice who know a lot more than you do, I think that you should really consider it. And I was left out of the process. So, Pat, eventually got the plan up to snuff, and they had an advisor who did have enrollment meetings and whatnot. But I'm still amazed by that. But that happens. There are a lot of plan sponsors out there that don't have advisors. Another example is when I was at that law firm, I represented a medical device company who had a payroll provider TPA, and they had no financial advisor on the plan. It was a $10 million 401k plan. And this payroll provider TPA brought one of their financial analysts or whatever it is, and talk about the fund lineup and telling them, oh, I think you should add a small cap fund to your plan. But by the way, you can't. I'm not giving you advice because I'm not a fiduciary. I'm just it was kind of a wink wink suggestion. So you know plan sponsors, there's quite a few out there that don't have a financial advisor on their plan. It is a recipe for disaster. I just think it's a bad idea, and therefore, um, I think that you know they need it. And again, like I said, picking out funds for a 401k plan is the least of what a good financial advisor does. Another on my list is not fixing plan errors through the voluntary compliance program. Whether it's the voluntary compliance program or self-correction program, you have plan sponsors who are ducking their responsibility in fixing plan errors. Self-correction, voluntary compliance, these are proactive approaches to correcting plan errors. And the reason we like that is because when you fix something on your own terms, it's always cheaper than fixing it on the government's terms. When your plan sponsor discovers errors and they don't correct them, and they're caught on a plan audit, there's this little thing called penalties. that me subject the plan sponsor to, as well as this other thing of solutions that they no longer have because they waited too long. For example, with a failed ADP test, some corrective principles are out the window once time has gone to another plan year or whatnot. So it's always more cost effective for plan sponsors to fix their problems and not play that audit gamble where, oh, I'm not going to fix this. I'll just take my chances on a plan audit and hoping that the statute of limitations is going to lapse on the 5500 for the year in question. You know what? Um, I love Vegas. I love Las Vegas. I don't gamble. I'm hoping to have an event in Las Vegas in December. We'll talk about that later when the time comes, when it's booked. But the fact of the matter is that you know I I don't gamble. The reason I don't gamble is I don't like to lose. And if a plan sponsor uh, gambles with an audit and gets audited, that's a big loss. That's not something I want to gamble with. I couldn't sleep at night. It would be a problem. And I've dealt with so many situations over the years where I'm on top of things, and I want to make sure that my plans sponsor clients are up to snuff and the plans are compliant. And I don't want to play Russian roulette with an audit of whether there'll be an audit or not. I mean, many years ago when I was at that law firm again, um, I was contacted um, by this bank, publicly traded bank, and for 20 years, they got the compensation wrong on the plan. So there were missed contributions owed on bonuses, missed deferral opportunities, and missed contributions. And through principles and dealing with multiple people, I said the self correction program was out of it was not possible. So, uh, you know, going back 20 years, I mean, the funniest part of the situation was that it was like a big four accounting firm did the 5500 and never found this error. I'm sorry, the audit of the 5500 never discovered the error for all these years, and they eventually got fired. I did get hired because they went to cheaper option and found an ERISA attorney who said he could do self correction. To me, once it goes past 3 years, I can't self correct that. The principles really show that you're going to want to get the IRS's approval on that. And I don't know what happened to them, but the voluntary compliance program is a great feature. Yeah, I'm not crazy with the fact that the fees to the program are now based on plan assets, and therefore most of the fees have increased. But it's a lot cheaper to pay $3,500 or $5,000 or $3,000 to the government as part of a VCP program than getting audited and getting hit with a $30,000 or $40,000 penalty. The same thing with the delinquent filing voluntary compliance program with the Department of Labor. You have a late 5500, you got now fees, you got penalties from the DOL and the IRS that are equaling about to over $3,000 a day, that with no cap. A delinquent filing program, I mean, it could cost you just a few $1,000s to fix multiple 5500s for multiple years. Yet, we still have plan sponsors who don't want to do that. I don't want to fess up. These programs are in place because the IRS and DOL want you to fix these problems. They don't have the manpower or person power to audit every single plan. And if they audit you, it's like in the movie Casino. You're either going to take the money or you're going to get the hammer. And they give the hammer to the plan sponsors that are not compliant. And I've seen it. I've been involved with it. I've had plan sponsors penalized because they didn't fix errors that they were supposed to. And it defies logic, but that's how people are. It really makes no sense to me for plan sponsors to save a couple of bucks by foregoing a submission to a VCP program and gambling that they won't be audited within the next 3 years. From experience, it's just not worth it. I just it's just not something I would do. It's just because it's knowing me with the luck of my luck. I always say these plans are going to get audited. So that's why I always recommend to be proactive and get that voluntary compliance program situation, the submission in. Last but not least on this list, not being proactive because it costs money. And, I offer this plan tune-up, retirement plan tune-up, $750, do a plan review, make sure the plan is up to stuff, make sure the plan is running correctly, going through the terms of the plan, this, and that. And I want to say in the 10 years that I've offered it, I've probably done about 7 or 8 of them. The fact of the matter is, these reviews can be paid from plan assets, and plan sponsors don't want it. It's just like they don't want to know. Plan sponsors, too many of them are reactive rather than proactive. They will only fix a problem when it breaks rather than when, to go out and find out what's going on. And it's costly and it's silly, and that's the nature of plan sponsors. Listen, when I hear that you contact an ERISA attorney, I always joke that the first thing that a plan sponsor does is, hide their wallet or hold on to their wallet, because attorneys are expensive, except for me, of course. And listen, a lot of people, plan sponsors, they don't want to know. I have a family relative. I always say, I don't want to go to a doctor, because if I go to a doctor, that means I'm sick. Well, genius. There are a lot of things that if you nip it in early and discover it early, the chances of surviving something like cancer or whatever is that much better by going to a doctor and being proactive. And plan sponsors, it's not life or death, but they do need to be proactive as well, because if you nip things in the bud that are discovered, at least you have the opportunity to fix it on your own terms and in a budget that you can handle. And just going and just assuming everything's fine because your plan provider said it was fine. I've seen too many plan sponsors who have paid a huge price for having that false sense of confidence that everything is okay and paying through the nose for it. So that's just my 2 cents. Plan sponsors can't afford to be cheap. It's just not something that they should be doing, and it is what it is. But, they need to understand the value. You put in a 401k plan. It's supposed to help your participants out. It's supposed to be a great enticement and retention tool, and it's only as good as they use it. And if they use it improperly, if they use it and don't pay attention to it, they're making a big mistake. And like I said, being too cheap on a plan is a recipe for disaster. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And of course, like I said, go to that 401ksite.com for further information on how you could be in Orlando for that 401k National Conference, as well as that 401k conference in Houston, St. Louis, and Minnesota. It's Ari Rosenbaum saying so long, and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.